Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection and a sense of belonging, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about sensitivity and the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. I know I say this every time, but this is an amazing episode. Today's guest is Heather Dominic, and she has a business called A Course in Business Miracles. She's got a business I'm going to tell you about. She is self-employed and in 2010 hit the $1 million mark with her business. And this really led her to creating a business to figure out ways that could be more sustainable as a highly sensitive person. And her business is all about working with highly sensitive entrepreneurs. You don't have to be an entrepreneur to listen to this episode because we talk about I always have judgment. I always use the word amazing. We have some amazing things we talk about. So she talks about A Course in Business Miracles. What is it? And it's based on A Course in Miracles, which is really about having a shift in perception. We talk about the retraining process. What is it that's needed for highly sensitive entrepreneurs to create sustainable success? And the challenges that Heather finds with the people that she works with are that they want to be self-employed, but there's this dueling aspect of wanting to share the gifts that they have to be of service, and then struggling how to do that. How do they support themselves and wanting to hide their highly sensitive traits? She talks about the highly sensitive entrepreneur's coping mechanisms and that highly sensitive coping cycle, which includes 3 aspects of pushing, hiding, or combo plattering, which is a combination of 1 and 2. And she talks about the goal is really to shift beyond coping to creating. We talk about the rhythms that we have and how we really benefit when we're attuned to the natural rhythms that we experience. We also talk about soothing versus nurturing. And is it okay or not okay to soothe? And one of those is conscious and one is unconscious. One is reactive and one is proactive. So we talk about this during the episode. She also talks about Tara Brach's RAINS IT process. And we'll talk about what that is. There'll be links to everything that we talk about in the show notes. You can get them at unapologeticallysensitive.com. And we also talk about energy management. It was so amazing. She's got so many things to offer. And I was kind of fangirling on her the whole time we were talking. And I actually talk about that towards the end. Let me tell you a little bit about Heather Dominic. Heather Dominic is a successful and highly spiritual entrepreneur. Heather is the winner of the 2015 Best of Manhattan Coaching Award and creator of the 2014 Stevie Award-winning virtual event, A Course in Business Miracles, 21-day discovery series that attracted close to 6,000 official registrants from all over the world. She has appeared on Lifetime Television and has been published in numerous books, including Stepping Stones to Success alongside Deepak Chopra. An exceptional facilitator and teacher, Heather is known for creating a safe, sacred community for true transformation. Whether she's teaching a Business Miracles class, delivering training online or in person, or mentoring members of her Business Miracles community in her various mentoring programs. Heather is also the founder and leader of the Highly Sensitive Entrepreneur Movement. I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. If you're interested in following me on social media, you can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com. There's an open Facebook page. We've got a closed Facebook group. I've got an Instagram account where I post lots of pictures of things that relate to the podcast about being a highly sensitive person and some videos of Gracie. And today I posted one of her eating Brussels sprouts. And now, on to the show. Hey, Heather, welcome.
Thank you.
I am so excited to have you here. I say that for every single guest, but I genuinely mean it.
I genuinely mean it when I always say that I'm so happy to be here, and I really am.
All right. I'm going to start out with the questions that I normally ask my guests, and then we'll move a little bit more into what you specialize in. But do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
Absolutely. Like off the chart.
When did you find out you were a highly sensitive person?
So I found out that I was a highly sensitive person around 2010. I had been self-employed for about 5 years at that time. I had the fortunate experience of bringing my business across the $1 million mark for the first time. I would love to say that it was this amazing celebratory balloons raining down from the sky experience, and it was not. Instead, what it was an absolute feeling and experience of overexhaustion, overwork, overwhelm. I really started to question everything at that time, including if I was meant to be self employed. And I really, in retrospect, can say that I went into a dark night of the soul and a deep place of inquiry. Through that process, was introduced to Dr. Elaine Aron. At that time, I had never even heard the phrase highly sensitive. Yet, as soon as I was introduced to what it meant to be highly sensitive and took one of Dr. Aron's assessments, I was really not surprised to learn that I was highly sensitive. What I was surprised by was learning how highly sensitive I was. And like I said, off the charts, highly sensitive. And that really was the start of so much that has changed in my life and in my work since then.
Wow. I have some questions I'll try and circle back to. What do you think of the term highly sensitive person?
Well, now, now I think of it as a really valuable explanation for those of us who really experience stimulation in a different way than those who are not highly sensitive. When I first heard it, I really had the experience of feeling embarrassed that there was something wrong with me. That was really, a motivating force for me to understand more about what it was and making the choice to how can I work with this rather than work against it.
I love that answer.
Mm-hmm.
Is there another term that you wish were used?
I don't think so. No. Mm-mm.
Okay. So can you tell the listeners a little bit about Course in Business Miracles? Did I say that correctly?
Yes, but before we go there, I did just have something pop into my mind in terms of another possibility than highly sensitive. So I don't know if this is my guides being facetious, but what popped into my mind was gifted one. I would take gifted one over a highly sensitive person. But
I love that. I've heard highly perceptive. Guests have told me that. Finely tuned to the textures of life. I've heard some really interesting alternatives.
Yeah, I bet you have. But at the same time, it is what it is. And it's important we claim it.
Absolutely. I think the thing that's challenging is that when we're in our own circle of people that get it, it doesn't matter what we call it. It's the cultural perception. And when we talk to people that aren't familiar with the trait and all of the associations that come up with being sensitive, that's where I find the challenge and the barrier.
Yeah, for sure. And I see it as an education process, and I see it as part of an opportunity for those of us who are highly sensitive to be willing to enter into that conversation and to share with non-highly sensitives more about what it does mean, and the opportunity again to be able to come to that kind of conversation from an education perspective rather than a defensive or shameful perspective.
I totally agree with you. And I think there are some people that just don't want to hear it. And my guess is that we intuitively have a sense of which people are open to hearing about it and which people we're just going to walk away feeling like we want to bang our head against a wall because people are very committed to having a very limited perspective of what it means.
Yeah, so true. But that's a great opportunity too, isn't it? To be like, is this someplace that I want to invest my energy in or not? Which again, I think is a great opportunity for highly sensitives. But again, I work with highly sensitive entrepreneurs. So we tend to be operating in a way that has to have us being willing to be out in the world and having those types of conversations.
Sure. So can you tell us a little bit about A Course in Business Miracles, what that is and why you started it?
Yes. The connection to A Course in Business Miracles and the highly sensitive entrepreneur movement really does go back to my own personal experience that I shared, that dark night of the soul. I am a firm believer and teacher that your ideal client, for those of us who are in business or desire to be, or think that maybe someday we might be, that your ideal client is a version of you. When I first discovered that I was highly sensitive and I started to really key into, okay, something important is happening here. Because if this is how I'm wired, then I really need to begin to learn how to work with this. And I need to then also begin to learn how to be in business differently than how I have been up until now, because the old way is just not going to work. It obviously didn't work so well, and I don't want to experience this dark space again. So I brought one of Dr. Aron's assessments into a group of 25 women entrepreneurs that I was working with at the time, one of our in-person meetings, and had them all take Dr. Aron's assessment. And true to my belief that your ideal client is a version of you, every single woman in that room was highly sensitive. And that did not surprise me, again, since that is something that I really have come to, believe and understand. But what did surprise me was that not one woman in that room wanted to be highly sensitive, as goes back to what we were just talking about in regards to the education process. That's when I knew something really important was happening here. I knew that every single woman in that room was talented. And I knew that if they also did not learn how to really work with their sensitive nature and not only embrace it, but really be able to utilize it as a strength in their business, that they would potentially have a very similar experience to the dark night experience that I had had. And I didn't want to see that happen. The connection to A Course in Business Miracles is, as I was sharing with you earlier, I have been a student of the psychological and spiritual curriculum, A Course in Miracles, for a very long time, since I was about 14 when my mother died. I really appreciate the definition of a miracle according to that curriculum, which is a shift in perception. And so in that moment, when every single woman in that room was highly sensitive, I really, truly saw very clearly, like, okay, not only do I need to do things differently, but there's a whole bunch of us that needs to do things differently. And we need to be willing to see things differently in order for that to happen. And that's the connection between A Course in Business Miracles and the highly sensitive entrepreneur movement.
I love that. When you're working with entrepreneurs that are highly sensitive, what are the primary challenges that you see? And then what are the strengths that you see? And how do you work with your highly sensitive entrepreneurs to help them kind of work through that? I know that that's a lot of information to ask you.
Yes. Well, I would say, to answer as simply as possible, first of all, the work that I do in the Business Miracles mentoring programs, I really refer to it as a retraining process. That does connect back to A Course in Miracles, is also how that curriculum is described. And it really is truly what is needed for a highly sensitive to be able to create a self-employed experience that is about solid, sustainable success. Through that retraining process, there are a lot of challenges and a lot of difficulties. And I would say probably the umbrella way to speak to those challenges is that those who are highly sensitive, who desire to be self-employed, typically find themselves in this very torturous place. And the torturous place is this dueling aspect of the desire to really share a gift that each HSE knows that they have, to be able to be of service by utilizing their gifts, and simultaneously really struggling with how to do that and either A, be able to support themselves in what they need as a person who's highly sensitive, or B, be able to quote unquote get away with not having anyone find out that they're highly sensitive. it literally is like this torturous place, because how in the world can you possibly have both? And so that's the process that we enter into, is exactly that. How can you have both? How can you be of service to the world through your business, offering the gifts that you have because you're highly sensitive, and simultaneously be able to honor yourself and what you need as a person who's highly sensitive?
I can attest to that. The podcast is a little over 6 months old, and I've really been pushing and hustling. It's been exciting. It's been exhilarating, finding my voice. It's been probably one of the most transformational experiences I've ever had. And that's not why I started a podcast. And at about the 6-month mark, I've known for months that I cannot keep up at the pace that I've been. It's just not sustainable. And, the fear of what if I let go instead of doing all this striving and kind of hustling for my worth? What will happen if I sit back, and will people still listen? Will they be interested? Am I going to lose my motivation? And knowing that I've got to sit in that discomfort of sitting back and allowing things to happen moving forward, because I want to be here for me and I want to be here for the listeners.
Yes, absolutely. Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I love being able to give listeners tangible take-home tools, and we're talking about so many things. Are there any specific things that you feel like are important to talk about to help people that know that they're highly sensitive, that maybe push too hard and need to figure out how to listen, or tools that you tend to use over and over? I mean, I know this is a really broad question.
Yes, sure. Though I would say probably because I just hear you naturally speaking to it, I'll take a moment to talk about what I've developed in part of my teachings that I refer to as the HSE coping mechanisms, and how those coping mechanisms connect into what I refer to as the HSE coping cycle. And this is one of the more early on teachings that really supports an HSE when they're first entering, into the Business Miracles mentoring programs, and the process of again, how to be in business differently. So the HSE coping mechanisms that I've identified through my work and research are what I refer to as the coping mechanism of pushing. Then there is the coping mechanism of hiding. Then there's the coping mechanism of combo plattering, where you go back and forth between the two. So let me speak to these for just a moment. So the coping mechanism of pushing is part of what I hear you speaking to, and I can absolutely out myself as a recovering pusher, for sure. I know that I'm sure that you speak to this as part of your work as well. But for those of us who are highly sensitive, especially considering that Dr. Aron didn't step into her work and around this area until the 1990s, most of us who are HSEs were not taught as a young person how to really work with our highly sensitive nature, our highly sensitive nervous system. So out of default and unconsciously, we learned how to cope with the different way that we process information in the world. Again, what I've identified through my research and work is that coping tends to fall into those three categories. So when you learn to cope with your highly sensitive nature by pushing, what that really means is that an HSE who tends towards the coping mechanism of pushing will get done what a non-highly sensitive will get done. So they'll get done at the end of the day what a non-highly sensitive entrepreneur will get done. And they will make sure that it's done. And it will come typically at a very high cost, a cost that will not be experienced by the non-HSE. And that cost of pushing, similar to what you were describing and what I've shared so far in my own story as well, that cost will often come in the form of some type of health issue or relationship issues, or just an overall sense of wear down or even breakdown for the HSE psychically, spiritually, emotionally. Then what will typically happen as part of the coping cycle is that the pusher will then enter into a space of soothing and a space of recovery until then we're tossed into the cycle again. you could go round and around that cycle for your entire life. I'm sure many highly sensitives do. And yes, you will cope for sure. And what's needed if you're highly sensitive and also someone who desires to be self-employed is to learn how to shift beyond coping and into creating, because that is what it means to be an entrepreneur. You are in the experience of creation. Now, an HSE who tends towards the coping mechanism of hiding, now that HSE will most likely be the HSE who has the most beautiful website. They have really gorgeous materials. They probably have absolutely brilliant programs mapped out, and no one is in those programs and no one is coming to the website. And there's really not very many people who are available to actually utilize the materials because the HSE is keeping themselves busy with all of those types of, projects or busyness works like website materials, etc. Or they are the person who, though they quote unquote work from home, they're the first one who is available to take care of their spouse or their child or their neighbor or their neighbor's hamster or anything else that's needed by anyone else. And then at the end of the day, wonder why there really hasn't been much income produced through the business, because that HSE is finding anything and everything to do, but what actually needs to be done to move the business forward in regards to marketing and selling. So they are hiding as a coping mechanism, and then they often beat themselves up, and then they go into soothing and recovery, and then around and around we go in the cycle again. And then again, you have the coping mechanism of combo plattering. And that's what I like to say is the HSE definition of insanity, because you will literally drive yourself crazy going back and forth between coping and hiding and coping and hiding and coping and hiding. That is one of the introductory, or a snippet, I should say, of the introductory teachings in regards to, again, that yes, most likely this approach has really served you and supported you in your life so far in regards to managing as a highly sensitive. And if you are interested in being self-employed, again, we need to learn how to go beyond coping and into creating.
I really like that. I have a question to ask you, because I can see what you're talking about in the extreme of what my experience has been. Not talking about the striving, but it really seems like my experience for myself and the clients that I work with there are these rhythms. We have rhythms where we're more out there, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. We're more out there, we're productive, and then we have times where we kind of pull back and need to restore. And I don't see this, what I'm talking about, as being a function of overdoing and then having to pull back. It's just kind of a natural rhythm. I mean, I would imagine that ultimately we would have balance all the time, but it seems like even within a relatively balanced lifestyle, I just notice that we tend to have these rhythms. And then when I hear you talk about, pushing, hiding, or combo plattering, it seems like it's the same thing, only on a much bigger scale that has more detriment to it. And are we talking about the same things?
I would say yes and not so much. So,
okay. So help me understand.
Yeah, for sure. So the yes part is, of course, rhythms, right? I mean, hopefully we all have that opportunity in regards to being able to be more attuned to the natural rhythms of life. And definitely as part of that, as an entrepreneur, is again, that creation process. When I teach the coping mechanisms and the coping cycle, questions that I get a lot are around the soothing aspect, and questions such as like, well, is it not okay to soothe? Or like, oh, are you saying that I shouldn't take a bath? Or like, I thought these things were like good things for me. Really what it comes down to is conscious versus unconscious. So when we're talking about the coping mechanisms and the coping cycle, that tends to be unconscious because, again, we weren't really taught how to work with our highly sensitive nature. And so we developed these coping mechanisms as an unconscious way of literally being able to just try our best to handle being in the world as a highly sensitive. bringing consciousness to the process then allows it, in my experience, to shift into one where you then are deliberately working with the rhythm, right? And understanding more deeply what it is that you need as a person who's highly sensitive to be able to be in that creative space, rather than feeling like when you're caught in the coping cycle that it's all happening to you, which is my experience for many highly sensitives. They feel like the world is happening to them and they just have to manage it the best that they can, versus being in that co-creative space. And again, a space of consciousness. And then absolutely, then you can work with the rhythms. And so in my teaching, I also then, as part of that, speak to the difference between soothing versus nurturing. And again, it really comes back to the consciousness behind it.
I'm processing.
That's very highly sensitive of you.
Yes, it is. I need some time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a lot for me to digest. I'm usually not at a loss for words, but I'm at a little bit of a loss for words. How about while I'm processing, are you comfortable talking about the difference between soothing versus nurturing?
It isn't necessarily that any of those soothing activities are bad for you, but it goes back to the consciousness with which we engage in them. There's also a process that I teach that comes from work that I've done with Tara Brach. So I refer to it as the Reins It process. And that stands for recognize, allow, inquire, nurture, and surrender. And so when you're going through the Reins It process, you're able to be consciously engaged in understanding or unpacking what is happening for you in a behavior. And then as part of that, really consciously entering into, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to enjoy this chocolate chip cookie, or I'm going to consciously sit with my partner and have a glass of wine, or I am really, fully aware of, this type of day that I had and I'm choosing to end it with a bath, or whatever it might be that you're choosing to nurture yourself and what it is that you are consciously needing to be able to be at your best as a person who's highly sensitive, whether that's for yourself, for your relationships, for your business, versus again, turning to soothing as a way to just try to manage the overextension of the nervous system as a result of the coping cycle.
What I hear you saying is that the soothing is more reactive, that we find out that there's no gas in the car and we better stop and find some gas to put in. And so we kind of grab at whatever we can to fill up the tank, where what I'm hearing you saying is that nurturing really comes from choice and planning out ahead of time and having a lifestyle that really works to suit our needs so that we make conscious choices about how we choose to keep that gas tank full. I don't know if that's an accurate analogy, but...
Oh, it's spot on, because I absolutely exactly use those words. Reactive versus proactive. Absolutely. Beautifully said.
And I think it's pretty common that for those people that are learning about their HS traits and are navigating this, I think it's not uncommon for us to first start out in the soothing because we're just trying to figure out what our rhythms are. And once we figure out what our rhythms are, then we can start adapting our lifestyle so that it really is more proactive as opposed to reactive.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely is a progressive part of the process. And what I'll add is that if you are a highly sensitive who's interested in being self-employed, an imperative part of the process, imperative, because literally, your livelihood depends on it.
Right, right. And I know that there are a lot of therapists that listen that are highly sensitive therapists. I don't know the entire demographics of everybody that's listening, but my guess is that this is really relevant to most people. Even if you don't have a business, I think the way that we structure our lives, if we're parents or employees or going to school, that there are certain things that we do have some control over. And as we can create lifestyles that are HS friendly, it really works in our favor.
Oh, of course, because you're happier, right? And you're able to ideally, genuinely feel happier, and then therefore be more engaged in every aspect of your life. I often speak about what it means to be financially successful as a person who's self-employed and to live an empowered life as a person who's highly sensitive. And I see them interchangeably and one and the same.
I have to tell you, I'm fangirling a little bit that you worked with Tara Brach and that the RAIN process. And what I'll do is I'll put a link in the show notes to Tara Brach has a YouTube video on doing a self-compassion. I may not be saying it correctly, but the RAIN process for self-compassion.
Yes, exactly. And I've just taken the training that I've done with her and adapted it slightly to serve and support the self-employed population.
Is there something that you have that I can link to as well? Because I, would love to send people your way. I just don't know all of your offerings.
Yeah, thank you. No, I only teach the RAINs It process within the mentoring programs.
Okay.
That's a very good point, though. I don't think I yet have a podcast or YouTube video on it. That is motivating me to create one.
And do you only work with women or do you work with men and women?
I like to say I work with women and a few very special men. And that's only because, I think they're just on a different progressive path and finding their way, to what it means to be a man who's highly sensitive, number one, and then what it means to be a man who's highly sensitive and self-employed, number two. So they just tend to be more of a rare breed at this point.
Yeah, there's someone I'm trying to get on the podcast who I don't want to give too much information because I want to preserve his anonymity, but this is someone who is incredibly sensitive and poetic. And when he communicates, like you just kind of melt and go like, oh, and he's a manly man. He's a big time weightlifter and has shared about how he kind of goes underground in his circles because his sensitivity is not appreciated. So it's kind of like he's living this dual life that, I get to see this incredibly sensitive, tender part of him that he shares with a very small community of us. And the rest of the world has no idea about the incredible gentleness and tenderness that he has to offer. And it really makes me wonder how much this happens for a number of men, that they just have to go underground with it because, there aren't enough of them to connect with.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I would say that is definitely happening. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That makes me sad. It makes my heart really sad because he's just so incredibly beautiful. And, when he shares things, like my heart just goes like, oh, it's that feeling of, I don't know if this is demeaning. I don't mean it, but the way that, when we see babies and puppies, it just touches that it's the vulnerability. I think that's really what I respond to. Incredible vulnerability.
Beautiful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So back to the task at hand. I'm curious, do you happen to notice if there are more introverts or extroverts of the entrepreneurs that you work with?
Yeah, it's a great question. I am sure you see the same, that you don't necessarily need to be introverted to be a highly sensitive or vice versa. And I would say that it's probably the majority of HSEs in the Business Miracles community are introverts. And I'm going to add some combination of, right? I really appreciated Susan Cain in her book, Quiet. And in that book, I thought she really eloquently spoke to the multiple combinations of introversion and extroversion rather than just one or the other. And also Dr. Aron, speaks to the high sensation seeker as part of being highly sensitive. There's just an array in the room for sure. But I would say the majority, if I had to guess, more for introversion than not.
I have a bone to pick, not with you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is about my need to provide education. And, as a highly sensitive person, I can really get on my soapbox and have a thing about justice and education and information. So I totally own that. Susan Cain combined traits of being highly sensitive when she wrote her book. So there are a number of people out there, and I was one of them until I learned about being a highly sensitive person and then a highly sensitive extrovert. And I'm a highly sensitive extrovert. But because most of the graphics and memes that we see and what Susan Cain wrote about combines the traits of being a highly sensitive person with an introvert, it really muddies it up. And it makes me feel sad because I my belief is that there are a number of people that identify as introverts. They're highly sensitive people. And I think having that additional information and being able to know what it is, that it's not introversion, it's being a highly sensitive person. I just think it limits people's information, and I'm stepping off my soapbox right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. And who knows why, right? But yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I would say who knows why she took that approach, but I would agree with that.
Right. And she interviewed Dr. Aron and Jacqueline Strickland. And then when the book came out, I'm reporting what I've read. So this is not direct experience, but from what I've read, that she chose to not make that distinction. So I'm going to link to, there's an article that Jacqueline Strickland wrote called Introversion, Extroversion, and the Highly Sensitive Person. And she talks about this in the article. She talks about when Dr. Aron and Jacqueline spoke to Susan Cain and kind of about how it's muddied the waters. And it's been a game changer for me knowing that I'm a highly sensitive extrovert, because for me, I really confused the overwhelm and overstimulation in what I read about introversion, thinking that I got uncomfortable around people. And what I'm really starting to see is I got so overwhelmed and overstimulated, didn't know I was a highly sensitive person, and figured I just had to avoid that stuff. And so the label of introvert actually gave me an excuse to avoid uncomfortable situations. And what I'm learning is my capacity to tolerate groups and crowds and stimulation is really much greater when I'm able to tease out what is it about those specific things that I find difficult, and how can I tailor it so that I can participate, do what I need to do, and get out before it fries me. And so that's one of the reasons why I continue to talk about this ad nauseum.
Yeah, well, no, I would agree. It's absolutely very important. And I think that really, also speaks to, the work that I do, which is how to learn how to really work with your nature, right? And that it, in any way that you may or may not, whether it's yourself or someone else, be put in a box or a label in regards to, let's say, again, being an introvert and what that means you can or cannot do is absolutely up for conversation.
Right. And I really do think I want to be very clear that we can honor our needs as highly sensitive people. This is not about violating our needs. This is not about pushing, but I think that there really are ways that we can start tuning in and figuring out what we can tolerate and what we can't. And we can re-enter situations that we may have previously written off. I mean, there are going to be certain things that are just deal breakers that are not ever going to be something that we would do. We'd rather poke our eyeballs out. I think that when we start breaking it down, that we have the capacity to manage much more when we're able to tease out that overwhelm and to see what we need to do in situations to make it workable. It's so empowering.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is the foundation of everything that I teach, because again, it's absolutely necessary if you desire to be successful as a person who's self-employed and who's also highly sensitive. There's so much more that we can, quote unquote, handle than our lack of experience or education in regards to really how to work with our highly sensitive nature as a strength that has previously been available and is available to us. And it's just a very empowering process to enter into.
Right. And I would even like to expand that if there are listeners that aren't entrepreneurs, but you're a parent or you've got a partner, or this is where I suck at coming up with examples. So y'all know that. But, if you have a hard time, like I used to dread going to back to school night, it was very overstimulating. And at that point, I did not have the tools to know what was going on. But if you just want to be able to show up more in your life for yourself or for your partner or for your kids or for work, and you felt like you can't do it, the things that Heather and I are talking about are also tools that you can learn so that your life can expand a little bit. And the things that you do can expand, again, not to the point of exhaustion, overwhelm, depletion, but making it so that you're able to do more of the things that you want to do in your life, but feel like you can't because those are not HS-friendly activities.
Yes, 100% for sure. Yeah, one of the very first teachings that I share in my 6-month mentoring program, which is about the foundational principles that I teach, is what I refer to as energy management, which are all tools to support you in exactly what it is that you're describing, how to be proactive and to manage your energy before going into a situation like back to school night or networking or what have you, so that you again are participating and co-creating your experience and not just feeling and believing that the world is happening to you.
Yeah. Do you find that this is my experience? So that's it's a leading question. Do you find that as you grow and you level up and learn new skills, as we all do, as we continue to grow, that you bring that to your work? And so what I found is when I started working with highly sensitive people, I focused on a certain thing. And then as I continue to grow and expand, I bring even more skills to my clients. And as I level up, I expect them to be able to level up. I don't mean that in a judgmental expectation way, but I've got more tools and my vision is being expanded. And so I want to bring that to my clients. Do you find that also for yourself?
Yes. And I would say I have the real fortunate aspect of working with program levels. So again, like that 6-month mentoring program that I was speaking about, that's the foundational principles. And that's always a really good place for someone to start. There's the both ability to provide support for when someone is first entering into the process of being an HSE, while also simultaneously having those more expanded teachings and tools and conversations. And also a big component of the work that I do is community. We really have the benefit of being a community of HSEs. So there's a beautiful cross learning that happens between HSEs as members of the community, in addition to, the mentoring or the coaching that myself and my team provide. There's the both and that's happening, which I feel really fortunate about.
I think that sense of community is so important because we're only 20% of the population. We already have this narrative of why aren't we like everybody else? And so there's so much power in being around other people that are wired the same. And it's so validating. And then I think with the mirror neurons that it's exponential how amazing it can feel to be around people of like minds that we just feel like we're at home with.
Absolutely. It's really, really powerful. And especially when we come together in person as a community, which, we do twice a year. I lead 2 training retreats a year, one in the spring and one in the fall, where the entire community comes together. And, we have HSEs who are traveling from all around the world. And that is really the feedback. It's what I see happening in front of my eyes, but it's the feedback that we get as well is so, so valuable to be in the space. Virtually, yes, but again, that in-person experience with others who really get you, but also, others who are on an empowering journey as a person who's highly sensitive and not just a co-sympathizing journey.
Right. Well, I was just thinking when you were talking, what a blessing you are to the people that you work with and really helping them see the superpowers and their strengths and to build community and to really teach them how to just shine in their lives. And yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, I feel so, so grateful and so blessed for the work that I do. And I'm actually just coming off of our spring training retreat. And again, the experience of being in person and watching this transformation in front of my eyes is really a privilege.
Wow. Wow. I know that as highly sensitive people, we really want to make the right decisions and that making big decisions can be challenging. Committing to things can be challenging. We want to get lots of information. Do you find that shows up in people needing information about joining your courses? I guess what I'm trying to articulate is my experience has been that there's something different in trying to provide services for HSPs that I think it's that need to get more information than a non-HSP. Do you know what I'm talking about? I feel like I'm being messy with my words.
I think I do know what you're talking about. I would say the first thing that comes to mind as I'm listening to you is we definitely have an extensive process of enrollment into, a mentoring program that is intentionally designed to support that more process-oriented decision-making process. That's number one. And number two, also what we teach is a lot of tools that support HSEs in being able to make decisions more easily and not getting so caught, in that I refer to as two of the HSE shadows, the shadow of perfectionism, the shadow of analysis paralysis. You just need to really be able to make decisions as an entrepreneur, and sometimes, more quickly than we would necessarily choose. But again, it's a beautiful skill to develop, and it's a skill that can be developed, as you and I have been talking about. It's definitely experience that I've had for myself, and it's so empowering. I set up the enrollment process to, again, really serve a person who's highly sensitive, but also to support them in seeing what's possible and really beginning to utilize the tools that I teach right from the very first conversation that we have with someone.
It's funny. My husband and I recently decided we haven't taken vacations for a long time, and we couldn't remember the last time the two of us actually got away together. So we just came back from a 4-day little getaway. But as we were looking at places to stay, and I'm at the computer, and we decide on places, like, okay, go ahead and book it. And the mouse is hovering over, the confirmed thing. I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure? Should we really do this? I can see how that reluctance comes up for me. And I guess where I'm at in my process around vacations is all I can do is observe it and know that, I hover, and then, okay, here I go.
Right.
And I can just laugh at that's where I'm at with my process. So I totally identify with what you're saying.
Yes. I let my husband book all the vacations. I always say, just come to me with two choices.
Well, it's funny because I had said what would really help me is I need you to take the lead on this, because if you leave it to me, I'm not going to do it. So what would be helpful, give me the Costco version of, give me a couple of choices. And then it turned out that we sat down and worked on it together. But I found that because of my difficulty with vacations, with spending money around vacations, around rest, all of those things, that if he let it be up to me, we wouldn't have gone anywhere. So I think there are lots of ways that we can work with our partners or understand what our strengths and challenges are and work with them so that we can have the things that we want.
Absolutely.
I'm looking at time. I would like to switch to some of the questions that I normally ask. But before we do that, are there any things that we haven't touched on that you feel like are important that you want to talk about?
Well, there's always so much. And I think it's been, really beautiful and spot on. So I'm looking forward to where we can go from here.
Okay. I'm kind of fangirling all over you, I have to say. And I was thinking, it's not really very professional as a professional to say, can I be you when I grow up? But I'm having a little bit of that going on.
Well, I appreciate that. And I really like the term fangirl, which I've never heard before. Now
you haven't?
Twice. So I think I'll be adopting that.
and you can use it as a verb, because I've been fangirling on you.
I know, which I am a big fan of. And as highly sensitives, we know that we're excellent with language. So I really always appreciate being able to create new words.
Well, there you go. Heather, what do you do for play?
Yes. So play is so important for those of us who are highly sensitive, and it can look different, right, for everyone. But for myself, I would say one of the things that I really love to do is to dance. That is definitely a way that I play. And I've been involved in all kinds of dance, from ballroom to swing to hustle to the 5 rhythms. My team and I, when we have the opportunities to be together in person, because we are a virtual team, but when we come together in person for those training retreats that I was talking about, as well as I do a week of team planning every year at the beach, which is very highly sensitive. We often take dance breaks together. So I really love that. I also really like to be creative. So whenever I can have the opportunity, I'm a big fan of adult coloring books and anything where I can just doodle or draw. I mean, I'm far from a drawer. I don't even use the word artist, but I really just like to express, let's say express through crayons and markers and colored pencils.
I love it. Are you familiar with Zentangle?
No.
Oh, I'll put it in the show notes, but I would totally look it up. Zentangle comes from Zen, meaning meditative, and tangle meaning to draw, and they're repetitive patterns. You don't have to be an artist. It is so
Ooh.
soothing. And if you live in San Diego and you look up the public libraries, Janet Macy teaches free Zentangle classes through the public library. And I had a weekend where I was I'm just really having a hard time. And I somehow got myself there. And for the time that I was Zentangling, I just had such relief from the junk that was going on. As soon as it was over, my junk came back and I got to sit with it and work through it. But it's incredibly soothing.
So cool. Yeah, I can't wait to learn more about that.
Yeah, yeah. Can you remember something specific that someone said to you about being a highly sensitive person that felt hurtful and insensitive that you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah. It's interesting because I honestly don't know if there's just one time that comes to mind. It's more vague and general. I remember just distinctly getting the message that the way that I thought and the way that I approached the world wasn't cool. So that would probably have been like around junior high, high school. That time was also very confusing for me because I lost my mother.
Yeah, I bet.
So there was a real shift for me where I felt very free in myself, including in my highly sensitive self as a young girl. And then really, I distinctly remember there being a shift. Again, I would probably say around junior high, the beginning of high school. But there isn't one particular moment or one thing that someone said that really stands out in any kind of accuracy.
If you could put all of those comments into one person and could go back to that person today, what would you want to tell them?
Oh, you're so missing out. You are so missing out. Sorry. Yeah, see ya. Too bad.
I love that. I love that. What are some of the challenges that you experience as a highly sensitive person?
There's definitely like the period before being aware that I was highly sensitive and now being aware that I'm highly sensitive. So the before is definitely pushing, right? And that I would literally like just drive myself into the ground. That was a problem. That was not helpful in any aspect of my life whatsoever. And now I would say there's less and less because of the ways that I've really learned to work with myself as a person who's highly sensitive. Yet where I can really still get caught up is if a conversation is moving too quickly. And that can definitely include arguments with my husband, which are less and less. And especially our relationship has really shifted in the best of ways with the knowledge that I'm highly sensitive and our ability to both really work with that. And sometimes, again, if a conversation moves too fast, he processes very differently than I do. That's where I find myself experiencing the most difficulty and frustration until I can find the words and say, you know what, like I need this to slow down, or I need to take a moment. But I'll catch myself in that space of trying to internally catch up and not being able to. That's tough.
And I think too that when there are relationships that have an emotional charge, that we don't have that distance and that ability to detach, I think it makes it more complicated. It's interesting. I've been married, I think it's 22 years. I think maybe we're coming up on 22 years. So we've been together for a long time. And there are times when we get into a pattern of communication that like, I'm just scratching my head because we're just not meeting each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't figure out what's going on. And it feels a little crazy making. And then there are other areas where I'm starting to, like the conversation is slowing down and I'm starting to see what the nature and the dynamic that goes on. And I'm not going to talk too much about this now. Maybe I'll do a bonus episode on it. But my husband has this way of joking, and the joking usually doesn't go over really well with me. And I haven't ever been able to figure out why. And recently, for some reason, I've been able to slow down the process and see that the way that he jokes is usually about something he's feeling uncomfortable about, and he puts it on me. Like a little example is our UPS driver, we know her by name, and we saw her, we were walking the dog, and he's like, you didn't wave at her. I didn't see her. My dog is blind. I'm trying to keep my dog from not bumping into cactus. So it was his anxiety about, how is she going to think that I didn't wave to her? And then I picked up his anxiety. So as we're walking the dog and she's down, I cross the street and go, my husband just gave me a hard time because I didn't wave to you. I'm waving to you now. And then I go back and he's like, you told her that I said that? So we're obviously still working out some minor things in our relationship. But I'm catching that these are the types of things that he says to me and then I react to them. So yeah, I hear you.
Yes. Well, and hopefully we're always working something out, right? That's like
it's always something. And that's just the natural part of being in a relationship, that we're always going to have challenges and bumps that come up there. For me, there is no perfect bliss and nirvana. When I hit that place, I think I'm done with my time on earth here. So knowing that's just part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do think that would be an awesome bonus episode and I can't wait to hear it.
My husband and I did an episode together. I think it's episode 20. I'm not sure, but it's a great episode where we talk about our differences, and he's an extrovert and loves to go out and do lots of big activities and wants me to initiate going to these things. And I'm like, rather be poking my eyeballs out. So I've had some couples come back and tell me that they listened together and it was really helpful.
Oh, I bet it was. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm kind of giggling because I'm just remembering that like last night, my husband said to me, do you think I could ever get you to RV?
To which you responded?
I was like, well, I actually, because, he really appreciates the outdoors and is always, we live in New York City and he's always looking to be able to go on kind of like these really large, massive outdoor excursions. And at one point in our relationship, I would have kind of believed that I had to muster myself to go do that with him. And now that's just not the case. It's like, great, you go have a fabulous time. I will be here at the cafe when you get back. So the fact that he said RVing, I thought was like a compromise.
Well, my husband and I have talked about this. So what would work for me about RVing is I can nest. I've got the same place. It's not packing and unpacking. I like that familiarity. I like the routine. I can have the food that works for me. So yeah, I don't know. Is that like a Y chromosome thing, the RVing?
I don't know, but I just thought it was like the funniest question.
Okay. So for any of you females that love RVing, that was a very sexist thing of me to say. And I don't mean to be sexist. So you can have any kind of chromosome and love RVing.
It's true. And I would say, and I'd love to hear what you love about it. So please feel free to share. Send it to Patricia, and then she'll send it on to me.
Unapologetically sensitive at gmail.com. Subject line, why I love RVing. So Heather, my last question to you is, what would you want to tell your younger self about being a highly sensitive person?
Yes. I would tell my younger self, it's okay that you feel different and it's okay that you are different, and keep listening to the record Free to Be You and Me even after you turn 14.
I have that book. It's sitting on my bookshelf. I had the album. I think I have the CD.
It was literally my favorite album growing up. And I was like, oh, why didn't I just stay with that? If I could have just held on to that, from 14 to 34, that would have been super, super helpful.
Yeah. I think there are a couple of books, and I just moved offices in my house. And so I brought all of my stuff, and I had all of those. And like I said, I have the CD. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Heather, we're out of time. This has been such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I really appreciate it.
Likewise. I so appreciate being invited into this conversation and have just loved every moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I really hope that you found it as helpful and informative as I did. As I've been moving into more of a coaching model, and this really was even crystallized even more in talking with Heather, what really excites me is, and I'm still learning how to language the difference between therapy and coaching. So this is an evolving process. Please don't hold me to it. It's not my intention to rub anybody the wrong way. But what I'm finding with my orientation is when I was working with clients in a therapy model, it really felt like I needed to be there for the client in terms of allowing them to figure out what they wanted to talk about, creating room for silence, and really processing lots of feelings. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. What I'm loving about coaching is a lot of the things that Heather and I were talking about is allowing people to be where they're at, but also having clients talk about what things they want to work on and actively working with them and leading them in the direction that they want to go. And for me, I felt like with therapy that wasn't really my job to lead people. It really was kind of right there with them, allowing them to figure out where we wanted to go. And what I'm really loving about coaching and the feedback I'm getting from clients is they really are enjoying the progress that they're making, and it really fits my style of wanting to provide education and feedback and kind of just have people move towards their goals. So after listening to this episode, if you're identifying areas in your life where you want to maybe move through some things that you feel like are holding you back and you're interested in working with me, I'd love to hop on a call, do a free 20-minute consult. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. You can go to the website, unapologeticallysensitive.com, to get more information. I'd love to work with you. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.